At 68 years old, I thought I had finally figured life out. I had spent decades working, saving, planning for retirement, and after years of dreaming about it, I finally packed my bags and moved to the Philippines. At first, it felt like I had made the best decision of my life. The weather was warm. My expenses were lower. The stress I carried for years seemed to disappear almost overnight. For the first time in a long time, I felt free. But less than a year after I arrived, something happened that forced me to face a reality I had been trying not to think about. I wasn't getting younger, and no matter how far I traveled, I couldn't leave that behind. What started as a small problem eventually became one of the biggest wake-up calls of my retirement, and it completely changed the way I looked at growing old in another country. Like a lot of Americans my age, I spent years worrying about money, not because I wanted to be rich. I just wanted enough to pay my bills, enough to enjoy retirement, enough to stop staring at my bank account every month wondering if I was going to run out. The Philippines seemed like the answer. Everywhere I looked, people were talking about how far a retirement check could go. Videos showed beautiful beaches, affordable housing, friendly people, a slower pace of life. The more I researched, the more convinced I became that this was where I wanted to spend the next chapter of my life. Of course, people had their opinions. Some thought I was making a mistake. Others warned me about being so far from family. A few people asked what I would do if I ever got sick. At the time, I brushed those concerns aside. I felt healthy. I walked every day. My blood pressure was under control. I wasn't taking a handful of medications. I wasn't worried about hospitals. I wasn't worried about doctors. And I certainly wasn't worried about my health. Looking back now, that confidence may have been my first mistake. The first several months felt almost perfect. I settled into a routine: morning coffee, trips to the local market, conversations with neighbors, long walks in the evening. For the first time in years, life felt simple. I wasn't rushing everywhere. I wasn't sitting in traffic. I wasn't counting down the days until the next paycheck. I started sleeping better. My stress levels dropped. I even felt healthier than I had back in America. That's why what happened next caught me completely off guard. One morning, I woke up feeling unusually tired, not exhausted, just different. At first, I ignored it. I figured I hadn't slept well. Maybe it was the heat, maybe I was just getting older. But over the following weeks, that feeling didn't go away, and little by little, I started noticing other things too. At first, I did what a lot of people do. I convinced myself it wasn't a big deal. After all, I was 68 years old. Nobody feels exactly the same at 68 as they did at 48. A little fatigue didn't seem worth worrying about. Some days I felt perfectly normal, other days I didn't. But because the symptoms came and went, it was easy to make excuses. Maybe I hadn't slept well. Maybe I was dehydrated. Maybe it was the heat. Maybe I was just getting older. The truth is, I didn't want to think about what it might be. When you've spent most of your life healthy, it's easy to believe that serious health problems happen to other people, not you. At least, not yet. So I kept doing what I'd always done. I went about my daily routine, took my walks, ran errands, met friends for coffee, and for a while I convinced myself everything was fine. But deep down, I knew something had changed. I just wasn't ready to admit it. Then, one afternoon, something happened that I couldn't ignore. It wasn't some dramatic medical emergency, at least not at first. I was walking home after running a few errands when I suddenly felt lightheaded. It came out of nowhere. One minute I was fine. The next, I felt like the ground wasn't quite steady beneath me. I stopped walking and sat down for a few minutes. Eventually the feeling passed, but it shook me. Not because it was severe, because it was unfamiliar. For the first time since moving to the Philippines, I found myself asking a question I had avoided for months. What happens if something is actually wrong? Back in America, I knew exactly where I would go. I knew the hospitals. I knew the doctors. I understood the system. Here, I didn't. Suddenly, all those warnings people had given me before I moved came rushing back into my mind. What if I need treatment? What if I need surgery? What if this turns into something serious? The thoughts started coming faster than I could stop them. And once those fears get into your head, they're hard to ignore. For the next several days, I paid attention to every little ache and pain, every unusual feeling, every moment of fatigue. It's amazing how quickly your mind can turn a minor symptom into a major concern, especially when you're thousands of miles from the place you've always called home. Eventually, I realized something. Whether I liked it or not, I needed answers. Making that appointment wasn't easy, not because it was difficult, because I was afraid of what I might hear. Sometimes uncertainty feels safer than the truth. As long as you don't know what's wrong, you can still tell yourself everything is probably okay. But sooner or later, reality catches up with you. The clinic itself wasn't what I expected. It wasn't the large modern medical facility I had imagined. It was smaller, simpler, more personal. The staff greeted me warmly. People were patient. Nobody seemed rushed. And almost immediately, some of my anxiety started to fade. After discussing my symptoms and going through a few basic tests, the doctor asked me a question that caught me off guard. How much stress have you been under lately? Stress? That wasn't the answer I expected. I had retired. I had moved to paradise. Wasn't I supposed to be relaxed? But the more we talked, the more I realized something. Just because I wasn't working anymore didn't mean I wasn't carrying stress. Moving to another country, being far from family, managing finances, building a new life, adapting to a different culture. Those things take a toll, even when you're happy, especially when you're happy. Because sometimes you're so focused on making your new life work that you forget to take care of yourself. Still, the doctor wanted additional tests. Nothing alarming, just enough to rule out more serious possibilities. And that's when the waiting began. Waiting for test results is a strange thing. You continue living your life, but part of your mind is somewhere else. Every day felt normal on the surface. I drank my coffee, went for walks, talked with friends, watched the world go by. But in the background, one question never disappeared. What if something is seriously wrong? At night, my mind would wander. I thought about the future. I thought about my family. I thought about all the things I still wanted to do. The funny thing about getting older is that you become more aware of time. When you're young, it feels endless. At 68, you start realizing that every year matters. Every healthy year matters. And sitting there waiting for those results forced me to confront something I had spent years avoiding. I wasn't afraid of getting older. I was afraid of running out of time. For the first time since moving to the Philippines, I wasn't thinking about beaches, or lower costs, or retirement. I was thinking about what truly mattered, and that realization changed me more than any diagnosis ever could. A week later, I sat across from the doctor, waiting to hear the results. I had spent days imagining every possible outcome, some realistic, some completely irrational. It's amazing what the human mind can do when it's left alone with uncertainty. The doctor reviewed the tests one by one. Everything looked better than I expected. There were a few things I needed to pay attention to, a few numbers that deserved monitoring, a few lifestyle adjustments that would probably help. But there was no major disease hiding in the results, no devastating diagnosis, no life-changing news. In many ways, it was the best outcome I could have hoped for. I should have felt relieved, and I did. But I also felt something else, embarrassed. Not because I had gone to the doctor, because I realized how much I had taken my health for granted. For years, I had assumed good health was simply normal, something that would continue indefinitely, something that didn't require much thought. That experience reminded me how quickly that can change. One unexpected symptom, one doctor's appointment, 1 week of waiting, and suddenly you realize how valuable your health really is. As I left the clinic that day, I felt lighter, not because I had all the answers, because I had stopped pretending I was invincible. When people talk about retiring overseas, they usually focus on the obvious things: the cost of living, the weather, the food, the beaches, the lifestyle, and those things absolutely matter. But there's another side of retirement that doesn't get discussed nearly enough. Eventually, every one of us gets older. Eventually, every one of us faces health challenges. It doesn't matter whether you're living in America, the Philippines, or anywhere else in the world. Age eventually catches up with all of us. Before moving overseas, I spent countless hours researching housing costs, visa requirements, transportation, utilities, internet speeds. I knew exactly what my monthly budget would look like. But I spent very little time thinking about healthcare. I assumed I would figure it out later. Fortunately, I was lucky. My situation turned out to be manageable, but it taught me an important lesson. If you're considering retiring overseas, don't just prepare financially. Prepare medically. Know where the hospitals are. Understand your insurance options. Have a plan before you need one. Because the worst time to learn how a healthcare system works is during an emergency. Looking back, the biggest lesson wasn't about healthcare. It was about time. That doctor's visit forced me to confront something I had quietly avoided for years. None of us know how much time we have left. At 68, that reality feels different than it did when I was younger. The years seem to move faster. Birthdays arrive sooner. The calendar pages disappear quicker than they used to. For a while, that thought scared me. Then eventually it did the opposite. It made me appreciate things more. The simple mornings, the conversations with friends, the quiet evenings, the ordinary days that are so easy to overlook. When you're younger, you're always planning for someday. Someday I'll travel. Someday I'll retire. Someday I'll enjoy life. Then one day you wake up and realize you're already living in the someday you spent decades imagining. And suddenly the small moments start feeling a lot more important. People sometimes ask me whether moving to the Philippines was worth it, especially after experiences like this. My answer surprises some people, absolutely, without hesitation. The health scare didn't make me regret moving here. If anything, it made me appreciate my decision even more, because it reminded me why I came in the first place. I didn't move here because I thought it would make me younger. I didn't move here because I thought life would suddenly become perfect. I moved here because I wanted to enjoy the years I still have, and that's exactly what I'm doing. The truth is, getting older isn't something you can escape. It follows you wherever you go, across oceans, across borders, across every major decision you make. The goal isn't to outrun aging. The goal is to build a life worth living while you're still healthy enough to enjoy it. For me, that life happens to be here in the Philippines. And despite the challenges, despite the uncertainty, and despite the occasional reminder that I'm not 30 anymore, if I had the chance to make the decision all over again, I'd still get on that plane. I'd still take the risk, and I'd still choose this life. Because growing older is inevitable. But how you spend those years, that's still up to you.